Hi, everybody. This is Stephanie Santoso, Director of Maker Initiatives at Citizen Schools. I see that we've got a good number of attendees joining us online. I'm really excited to talk to you today about the Make for All initiative and to talk about some ways that you and your organizations can get involved. So thanks so much for joining. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I see that people are gradually joining in, and we'll also actually be making this webinar available afterwards as well. So if you have colleagues or folks that you know that really wanted to join but couldn't make it, no worries, we will actually send out a copy of the webinar afterwards, and then we'll also make it easily available on the makeforall.org website. So just to let you know, my colleague Megan Salgado is also on the line. She's here and part of the core team at Citizen Schools. She'll be, for those of you who are joining online, she'll actually be monitoring the chat box. So if there are ideas or questions that you have throughout this webinar, feel free to add those into the chat box. I think what we're going to do is I want to spend some time this first half of the webinar just giving you a little run through of what the Make for All initiative is, and then I want to give us plenty of time to talk about any questions or ideas that come up. So the second half of our hour chunk of time we'll set aside for questions. And of course, for those of you who are joining by phone, you can also feel free to ask questions as well. I think we'll have an opportunity to have you all unmute at the end so that you can do that. But for right now, I think everybody is on mute for now. So without further ado, just to give you a little bit of a quick overview. So I'm the Director of Maker Initiatives at Citizen Schools. So Citizen Schools, some of you may be familiar with our work. We're a national nonprofit which focuses on connecting youth to high-quality maker-centered learning and STEM mentorship experiences. And our focus is really on reaching underserved communities and underrepresented students. And one of the big ways that we do this is we actually work with a network of 22 communities. We call this the US 2020 City Network. And this next year, the City Network is poised to serve over 100,000 students across the 2018-2019 school year. So we're really excited about that. Each of those communities have a lead institution that is kind of the main contact for that community. The institution could be a museum, it could be a nonprofit organization that's really working in this space. And last year, we actually ran a competition called the STEM Coalition Challenge that was supported by Schmidt Futures and Arconic Foundation. And we actually, the focus of the challenge was actually around engaging communities and broadening access to maker-centered learning opportunities through STEM. And we were really excited to receive over 90 applications. And what that data point showed us was actually that there is a huge demand and a huge need for support and collaboration around maker-centered learning to really continue to reach more students. I think we all know that maker-centered learning is something that is increasingly a part of the education and learning experience for students, but we have a lot of students and a lot of communities and families that don't currently have those opportunities. And so this is just a map that shows you the communities that are part of the US 2020 City Network. I know a number of you that are on the call are part of this network as well, and but we're really excited because of the variety of cities and communities that we're working with. They're doing some really great work in the space of maker-centered learning and are actually already working on developing some commitments to announce for the Make for All initiative, which I'll talk a little bit more about later in this presentation. So what is Make for All? So Make for All is an initiative that it's really a community-driven initiative. And I mentioned that data point around the 90+ communities that really raised their hands and said, maker-centered learning is a priority for us, and we want to do more in this space. So the Make for All initiative actually builds on this data point and lots of the other great work that organizations are doing around the country to broaden access to these maker-focused learning experiences. So the goal of Make for All is really around ensuring that children of all backgrounds have the opportunity to have access to the tools, mentors, and spaces to become the next generation of problem solvers, inventors, engineers, designers, and entrepreneurs. And I know that sounds like a really ambitious goal, but I think it's important to be ambitious because the stakes are really high. And I think all of us probably agree that we really want these opportunities for all youth and all students. And that's something that we recognize that in order to make progress on a moonshot like this, we really needed to collaborate with a variety of different organizations in order to do this. So the approach is really that we want to work with organizations across the country, both locally, regionally, and nationally, to really seize the opportunity to broaden access to maker-centered learning. And I just wanted to call out here kind of the approach that we're taking. There's sort of five different main aspects of the approach. So one I mentioned was really coordinating at the field level, and I'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about commitments, but the idea here is that there are lots of organizations that are doing this work locally, but we also think that there are ways that we could be working better together. So in terms of thinking about ways that we could develop new partnerships or collaborations. Another aspect of this approach is actually identifying and scaling really promising models of approaches to implementing maker-centered learning that may be working in one part of the country or one or a couple communities, and lifting those up and creating ways for other communities and other organizations to take those models and adapt them, because there's no reason why everybody needs to start from scratch and have their own program. If there's something that's worked really well in one community, it's possible that it could work really well for another. The third is around recruiting new partners and growing the ecosystem. I think this kind of speaks to the importance of sustainability. I think that's one thing that I know a lot of organizations and individuals, whether they're educators or parents, talk a lot about is how to make maker-centered learning experiences really sustainable and long-term, so that there are opportunities that follow a student, K-12 into higher ed or post-secondary, and as they're entering the workforce and beyond. So that's something we're really excited about, and something we think the call for commitments that we just launched will really help with. And then the last two is, the fourth is really around furthering the agenda around research related to maker-centered learning. And when I say furthering, I mean also that there's some really valuable existing research that's been done, but making sure that the findings of that research gets translated in a way that practitioners can really implement and utilize, and also identifying gaps where there are recognized needs around additional research that needs to be done in order to really understand the impact of maker-centered learning across a wide variety of different issues. Figuring out showcase the impact and the progress of maker-centered learning. So I see you through the Make for All initiative is moving forward, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. And there will be a number of opportunities to kind of at the great work that organizations have been doing. Part of that is in an effort to identify new partners and other stakeholders locally, but also to think about ways that other organizations could be supporting your work, whether through funding or other non-monetary resources. When I say community-driven model, in terms of how we're structuring Make for All, we really mean it. So I sit at Citizen Schools, and I'm coordinating the Make for All initiative, but with in collaboration with a number of other organizations that are part of the Make for All Advisory Council. And so if you see here, you'll see it's really a combination of some really impressive organizations that are really in their own unique ways contributing to supporting maker-centered learning. So on the side of funding organizations, we have Arconic Foundation, which is based in Pittsburgh, but they have been doing a lot of work to fund opportunities for students to engage in maker-centered learning and advanced manufacturing and digital fabrication. Nationally, we have Schmidt Futures that is supporting the Make for All initiative. And then we have a number of nonprofits that are really experts in the space of maker-centered learning. And you may recognize some of these, including Maker Ed and Digital Promise. And then we have Nation of Makers, which is really the connective tissue, one of the organizations that is really serving as connective tissue to really build the network of maker organizations, including the many maker spaces that are working in communities across the country. Genentech's doing some really amazing work at the intersection of engaging students in science and maker education, and we're really excited to have them on board. And then we have Reimagine America School, which is a new initiative that is focused on helping school districts to better design schools and spaces to foster 21st century learning. And so it's with this group of organizations that we're really pushing forward on this initiative. So you may have seen that earlier this year. Well, actually, it was last year. A call for commitment. So this call for commitment is really it's an open invitation for all organizations and institutions. So you could be a company, you could be a large company or a small company like a startup. You could be a makerspace, a library, museum, a higher ed institution, a minority serving institution, a K through 12 school, and a nonprofit organization that's doing work in this space. But really the idea is that we would love to create opportunities for organizations to develop new initiatives, partnerships, and projects in support of maker-centered learning. And so, a lot of people tend to ask, and I think, that's what part of today will be about, is to talk a little bit about what a commitment is and what they look like and how you can start to think about, how to develop one, and also just why are they useful specifically for your organization. So commitments are really, I think the best way to sum it up is that they're new, specific, and measurable actions that an organization or multiple organizations develop they decided to take those actions in order to meet a particular goal. So that's really abstract. So the idea around a commitment is we issued a national call for commitments in support of maker-centered learning, but a call for commitments can really be about any particular topic that is important to a particular community. So in terms of our call for commitments, we announced it in December, and we are going to, we have a call for commitments open now, and the idea is between now and May, we want to work with as many organizations that are interested in working with us as possible. And the idea being that we want to be able to announce new partnerships, new initiatives, and these commitments as part of a big celebration at NomCon, which is the National Maker Community Conference that's hosted by Nation of Makers every year. And this year, NomCon is actually going to be taking place June 14th through 16th, and that'll be in the lovely makery city of Chattanooga, Tennessee. They have a really, really wonderful maker community there with lots of organizations that are really, really supportive of maker-centered learning. So we're really excited about that. So it's an opportunity for, to the extent that your organization wants to submit a commitment, it's an opportunity to also showcase the work that you're doing on a national scale, and also it's a way for you all to potentially identify, because of the fact that the commitments will be really visible, it can also help you to identify new partners and new supporters for that work related to your commitment. So I talked a little bit about, I just sort of talked the good things that come with making a commitment, or why that they can be beneficial to your organization. But this is just, this particular slide kind of summarizes it even better probably. So, you know, one, it's really around, you can sort of think of commitment too as helping you accelerate the work that you're doing in the space. So if there is something that you've always been wanting to do around maker-centered learning, whether that's, you know, a dream partner organization, or you want to expand a program that you currently run, the Commitments Act is kind of an artificial deadline to help you make progress on that idea. The second one is really around the fact that commitments can help spread the word about one of your programs or a model or an activity that you've developed that you really think can be valuable and useful to other communities or organizations. So it's also an opportunity to lift up what you're doing to potentially an audience of folks within the community that may not be aware of what you're doing, but might be really interested in either leveraging resources that you've developed or working with you on doing something similar in their community. And then the third is really around at the local, regional, and national level, being able to better match organizations that have resources and need resources. So you can kind of think of the commitments model as an opportunity to map both needs and assets or resources. And the Make for All team is really focused on, through this commitment development process, being able to match commitment makers with organizations that have those resources. So I wanted to break down a little bit of what a commitment actually looks like. So we're going to see a couple of examples here, but really I mentioned before kind of the three ways to think about a commitment is that the commitment will have sort of three very specific characteristics. So a commitment should be new, it should be specific, and it should be measurable. And, you know, when we say new, a lot of people think, oh, I have to start something from scratch. And in some cases, that may be something that an organization wants to do. They may want to create a new program or a brand new partnership. But in some cases, we also think about new as expanding work that's already being done. So that's something just to keep in mind, is that new also means expanding or growing something that you're already doing with your organization and with your community. When we talk about specific, because the idea is that a commitment is a really actionable next step, we want the commitment to be to read it. They would understand potentially how they might be able to support or collaborate with you to make, when you're trying to think about how to make a commitment specific. It's around thinking about the way that other organizations will interpret the commitment that you've developed. How will they understand how they can get involved? And then the third is around measurable. And so in order to, since the goal of this is really to broaden access to maker-centered learning and really have an impact so that you have more students, more adults, more families that have these opportunities, then we really need to be measuring how your commitment is going to affect the community that you're working with. And so when we say measurable, we really like to see commitments that are tied to a metric or maybe multiple metrics that can help you measure the impact. And also just so that you can, the idea is that we really want commitments that organizations will work on in the coming year or the coming 2 years. And we need, for your organization, it's helpful to also be able to track progress around that. So when we thought about the Make for All commitment model, we identified that there should be some key criteria, priorities that are based on kind of the ways that we feel there are needs in the space around specifically around maker-centered learning in the field of maker-centered learning and maker education. So these are 3 things that, as you're thinking about commitments, we would love for you to prioritize in terms of, how your commitment can help to further these 3 areas. So the first is around equity and inclusion. So really thinking about how might a commitment that you develop really ensure that underserved and underrepresented students and families are included. And the second is really around ecosystem building. So how does the work that you're doing help to grow and strengthen the kind of the network or the community in your town, in your city, in your state, maybe that is supporting maker-centered learning. And then the third is around scaling what already works. I think there are lots of really great things that organizations are doing, and for various reasons, for bandwidth, it could be limitations around bandwidth or other things. Sometimes it's hard to distribute the resources that could provide other communities with the opportunity to scale something that you might be doing in your community. So thinking about how can you best take a program or an activity or an idea that you found has worked really well and share that with other organizations and communities across the country. So I just wanted to move into a couple of commitment examples. So these are actually commitment examples that came from previous calls for commitments in support of the maker movement and maker education that took place in 2014, 2015, and 2016. This was during the Obama administration. So these are actually examples that are already commitments that have been announced. And so I'm just going to run through 3 of these commitments, and they're all kind of different types of commitments, so you can kind of see, that we really value a diversity of different kinds of commitments that are focused on different aspects of maker-centered learning. I would also say, too, that I think one question that a lot of people ask is, how big does a commitment have to be in order to be part of the Make for All initiative and in order to be announced and celebrated? And for us, what is more important is that the commitment that you're making is really going to be, valuable and have an impact on the community that you're working with. So size, we're less concerned about the number of dollars or the number of students you're going to reach, because we recognize that different organizations are different sizes and work in different communities. But what we're really looking for is a quality of the commitment, in terms of that the commitment will be something that that will truly have an impact. So this particular commitment is a collaboration, and so this one, some of you may be fairly familiar with the Maker Promise initiative, but it's this was the commitment that actually launched the Maker Promise initiative, and so you can see that it's between 2 organizations, Digital Promise and Maker Ed, and what we did here was to actually call out the elements of the commitment that have those sort of three aspects of new, measurable, and specific. And this commitment is an example of one that addresses that criteria of scale in terms of growing the ecosystem and fostering new partnerships, strategic partnerships that grow the ecosystem. And in this case, this commitment was really focused on building the network and community of administrators and educators that are committed to supporting maker-centered learning in the K-12 space. So you can see how in the run-up to launching this Maker Promise initiative, Digital Promise and Maker Ed actually did a good amount of work to actually already get a wide variety of schools to sign, leaders from schools to sign on to the Maker Promise. But what I thought was, and since this commitment has launched, Maker Ed and Digital Promise has done a really amazing job in actually building out this initiative even further. But you can see, even in the early days of the Maker Promise, they were very specific about the ways in which administrators and educators could get involved. So you can also see that there are real steps that potentially other signers of the Maker Promise could take in order to be part of the initiative. The second example is from the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, and I like this one because it's different in terms of scale. So this is much more specific to the community that Chicago serves. So the previous commitment was one where they were organizing school leaders and educators at a national level, and it was in support of school leaders and educators. This one is more focused on the immediate community that the Museum of Science and Industry serves. So you can see that they're looking to actually expand a program that they already have going, that they really think is doing really well, the Innovation Clubs. I really liked too that they launched this equipment loan program. So the idea behind this particular part of the commitment was that they were recognizing that schools didn't feel comfortable, or in some cases didn't have the resources right off the bat to build their own maker spaces. So museums thought that one way they could actually help support schools in the greater Chicago area was to create this equipment loan program so that schools could actually have some of this equipment in their schools. They could test it out, and when they have the opportunity and have the resources to purchase equipment, then they would be even more informed about the choices that they want to make in that space. And then the third is an initiative of a nonprofit that does some really awesome work working with underserved communities in the greater New Orleans area. And they actually partnered up with the New Orleans Recreation and Development Commission. I really like this commitment because I think it shows that, I wanted to reinforce that I don't think for organizations that are smaller or perhaps they think is small, I wanted to encourage you all to have confidence that we really value those commitments too. So in this case, this partnership, you could argue that because they're reaching 75 teenagers, that it's a smaller scale commitment if you're measuring based off of the number of students reached. But this commitment was a really big deal for the community because it was a partnership with the New Orleans Rec Commission, and sows the seeds for potentially larger scale partnerships with that commission that could reach even more students. And for the community that they are working with, the fact that they were able to reach 75 teenagers over the course of the summer actually a significant impact and a really big deal. So those are a couple of examples of commitments. I'm just checking time and want to make sure that we have plenty of time for discussion and question and answers. So I only have a couple of additional slides. This one is just highlighting key dates around commitments. So we launched the call for commitments in late December. One next step is that we'll have an opportunity for you all to workshop your commitment ideas with us next month. So we'll have another call / webinar, and there's actually a link. What I'll do is I'll send out, for those of you that are on the webinar, I'll send out this deck, but we'll also put the link where you can register for that particular workshop on the Make for All site. But it'll be an opportunity for between now and February 24th. If you all are brainstorming ideas around commitments, we actually would love to workshop those commitments with you during that hour session. So you can kind of consider it as an opportunity to come to us with ideas. And by no means do the commitment ideas have to be fully fleshed out. The idea is that we would work on you around, brainstorming maybe partners, or if you have particular questions around, if you have a few different ideas about commitments that you might be wanting to make and you're not sure what makes the most sense, we'd love to chat more with you about that. And the deadline for submitting commitments, I know this sounds really far away, but May will actually be here before you know it. So the deadline for submitting commitments online is May 15th. And so kind of the way that the process will work is that certainly between now and May 15th, for you all that are developing commitments, I expect that probably you'll be talking to the Make for All team, including myself, around some ideas that you have, but kind of the drop-dead deadline for actually submitting text will be May 15th, and then we'll finalize commitments between May 15th and the week of NomCon, with the idea being that we will announce commitments and celebrate them at NomCon. And, I also want to talk about, and, the fact that the idea with Make for All is that it's an ongoing initiative. So once the intention is that once commitments are announced, and once you've developed commitments, the Make for All team is really committed to providing the kinds of infrastructure and resources that would help you meet those commitments. So we don't expect that everyone will have everything figured out by June. So what we really hope to do is that actually at the conference in Chattanooga, we will have some special sessions specifically for commitment makers to meet one another, to workshop around your commitments, and to actually develop those relationships amongst each other, so that we can work together to make sure that those commitments come true in the next year and beyond. So that's that last bullet point there, where we are talking about ensuring kind of the infrastructure support and other resources to make sure that you can meet those goals that you set for your organization and your community. So lastly, this is just some next steps. You'll see for any additional information, makeforall.org is really the best place to go. You can actually submit. We have a form there. If you go to makeforall.org, where you can submit your commitment idea, and then we are going to loop back with you to reach out so that we can do a follow-up conversation around your commitment idea. And then this is the slide that has there's a link to the workshop registration as well, and we'll get this out to you so you all have that too. So I will pause here, and I think at this point would love to take any questions, or even if you don't have questions, we would love to hear thoughts or ideas that you have as well about the initiative, or more specifically about the commitments, the call for commitments. And maybe what would be helpful for those that are online, feel free to add those questions or comments in the chat box, but also if you want to actually talk, feel free to use the hand raise. There's a hand raise icon that's on your dashboard, and we'll unmute you. I think that's the easiest way to do it. And Megan, have you seen any questions come through? I know that you're online as well.
Hey, yeah, sorry, I was on mute for a second. Not so far.
Well, maybe what we can do with the remaining time is, for those of you that are on, I would love if anyone was interested in sharing potentially a program or an activity that your organization is doing, or a project your organization is doing that you think could be of the Make for All call for commitment, something that you might be working on now that you're really excited about, that you think might be ready for announcing or sharing with the broader world in June. Don't be shy.
Great. Yeah, we've got somebody, we've got Matt Kensington, who I'm going to unmute here. Matt, you're on.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks for
joining. Good to talk to you. So I'm co-founder of a project called MakerNet, and I don't know. I'm sure some of the folks on the call have heard about MakerNet, and many haven't. But MakerNet essentially aims to solve two problems with one platform. The key problem we see, actually three problems. Sorry. One of the key problems we see in the maker movement right now is that makerspaces are doing amazing things, but they're doing so in an isolated fashion, and they don't work with each other as much as they could. We also see that there is a tremendous need for vocational education, particularly to fill a lot of unfilled STEM and manufacturing jobs. And then last but not least, makerspaces themselves have a really hard time because they don't have a good unified system for being able to manage their spaces. So MakerNet aims to solve those three by by essentially creating free and open source software that makerspaces can use to manage their makerspace. And along the way, you begin to generate an entire network of folks who share best practices, information, data, and so on. And you also have a provable source of information about what skills people are attaining, what capabilities there are in given makerspaces, and so on. Now, how is that interesting to Make for All? One piece of that particular platform that we have on our roadmap but have not started, so it would definitely fit new, is essentially what we call a marketplace of ideas. This is where educational content gets submitted to the platform and shared, and there are obviously different licenses that you can place on content and so on. But the idea is to try to make the best educational content in the entire maker movement available, so that if, for example, a lot of us are inventing this educational content from scratch. I know we made up all of our curricula for our welding classes and for our woodworking classes and for our laser classes and so on. And while there were some resources that we could find out there published by the makerspaces, there was no real easy way to take that content and then be able to rework it. And so part of the idea is to not only make it very easy for folks out there in the community to create great content and to share it, but also to remix it, to create new content, to rate it, to show who's using it and where, and therefore have essentially a chain of value that gets created and some idea of what the best possible way to learn a particular skill is. And some consensus around the community that once you have learned in this manner, that the skill is actually a provably learned skill. And that deals with a whole other class of things. We work with Experience API and some other things. But to be able to prove that someone has actually learned a skill, but that we have to do to make that work are also things that are of value to Make for All and to all the organizations that may have to maybe participate in commitment around that particular portion of the platform that we have that we've thought about needing to do, but we haven't committed to yet, and we'd really in the broader community would be interested in perhaps working on that with us. And because there's both the technical aspects of the platform itself, but there's also it's sort of a much more grassroots version of what the Fab Lab Network did with their Scopes DF project.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Matt. And I would love to connect with you maybe post webinar to learn more about MakerNet and also how Make for All could potentially be involved in some of these elements that seem really aligned with the goals of Make for All. And I was curious, you also mentioned real quickly the focus around vocational training and connections back to 21st century jobs and future of work. Can you talk a little bit about what you're envisioning there in terms of the way that MakerNet is going to help support some of those efforts?
Sure. One of the natural ways that having the integration with all of the management of the makerspace really lends itself to all of this is because if one of the projects we're also helping advance is one that was started by Ace Monster Toys called Fob All the Things. And this has to do with being able to do access management to tools and spaces. And when you go ahead and use your fob or your RFID or whatever it is that you're doing to authenticate yourself to a machine before you use it, it enables a lot of back-end data that really helps from the standpoint of how many hours have you spent on the laser, for example. And if you then have a profile into which you enter, oh, okay, by the way, on that last session, I was working on the laser specifically with etching anodized aluminum. Then that goes into your profile. The goal at the end is to have a lifelong learning profile being tracked, and then we're coupling that with a micro certifications platform that can also be crowdsourced. So to be able to describe what the ideal skills are for somebody who they would like to have come into an apprenticeship program, for example, and then tie that back to the skills attainment that happens within a makerspace. We're doing that both from a technology standpoint, with those two things I talked about, the profile and the micro certifications platform, but from a people standpoint, we're doing that also by working on trying to get certified by departments of labor and by the U.S. Department of Labor, and to allow opportunities essentially with, like we're also working with the Society for Manufacturing Engineers and a number of other organizations, specifically around trying to get to the point where everybody agrees that once you have certain skills, you can actually call that a certificate, and you can provably say that that person is ready for this apprenticeship, for example. So we're working specifically with some employers to try to generate some apprenticeship programs where we can prove that model out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. That's super helpful. Super helpful, Matt. Thank you. Anyone else who has ideas or thoughts, questions? Sorry, Megan, did you say something?
Yep, I was saying that we do have a couple of other questions from the chat box. The first one I think is I can just kind of field really quickly. Someone that joined in late, wondering if the slides will be made available. Yes, we're recording this webinar, and we can attach the slide deck as well to a follow-up email, so that if you came in late or you have some colleagues that weren't able to join that might be interested, we'll have the available for you afterwards. And then two other questions, Steph. One is from Amy Green. If you're not sure if you can get to NomCon, can you still participate?
That's a great question. Thanks, Amy. Yes, and that's something that I didn't mention earlier on, but of course we would love as many commitment makers who can make it to participate in NomCon and the events there that are specifically focused on MIPRL, but certainly we realize that not everyone can make it. So our goal too is that regardless of if you as a commitment maker can make it to NomCon or not, that we will showcase and celebrate and announce commitments nationally in other ways too. So we've been working on, myself and the advisory council have been working on kind of developing the plans for what that could look like, but of course includes a lot of coverage on social media. Can't promise anything now, but we're hoping that we'll have some national media coverage and local media coverage. So there will be plenty of other ways that we will uplift your commitments. So there'll also be other ways to participate remotely, even if you can't make it to the event.
Great. Yeah, of course. And then there's one last question, which is coming from Dalen Graham. And he's curious to know, from your position, where would you like to see the maker education move? Where would you like to see maker education move in the next year?
That's a great question. I feel like we should have an open forum and discussion around that question alone. We could do a whole nother session on that. I think I can speak to some of the things that I've seen. I think, some of the areas that I would really love to see us move the needle in the space is around particular communities that I think could have broader access to some of these experiences. I think there's a lot that we could do around including communities of color and minority majority communities. I think there's in rural communities with regards to maker-centered learning and maker education, but I would love to see more support for that and a collaboration among communities in that space. I think one of the things, a lot of really great work that's happening kind of in these sort of three areas of K-12 and then higher ed, and then starting to see some really great work coming out around connections between learning and work development. And Matt mentioned vocational education, but I think that those three categories could be talking to one another and collaborating with one another even more in terms of kind of creating a narrative around why it's important, not just for students to have opportunities for this at the elementary school level or at the higher education level, but throughout the course of their experiences, their academic experiences, and also for us to value these experiences as adults. So those are a couple of areas that I think I love, a couple of areas where I think we could be doing some really great work and to move the needle. I hope that's helpful. And Dale, I'd love to hear thoughts that you might have around this in this space too. I don't know if you are in a space where you can chat, but would love to continue that conversation.
Great.
Any last questions? We've got a few minutes more. Got a couple minutes more.
It looks like we have kind of a statement around from Vishal, sorry for maybe potentially butchering your name, Saktev. I think if these commitments are put up online for people to see, there might be options for new collaborations without waiting for NomCon. For example, I see options for MakerNet inside schools and universities and a joint commitment with them.
Yeah, so that's a really good idea. I think I think that there are ways where we could potentially think about maybe it's even something as simple as a working document, where folks can, if they would like, put their commitments in development in there, and others can have, others can view and access them. And that might actually be a really great idea just in terms of for folks who are also wanting a little inspiration as they're kind of thinking about what their own commitment may be. That's a really good idea. I mean, I think that's something we could easily do, is just to create an open Google Doc, with the understanding that if you want to keep your commitment secret, that's probably not where, if you want to kind of spend some time developing it without kind of others reaching out to you about it, then that might not be the best venue to add. But I think that only helps to foster some really great feedback and potentially for organizations to find new partners. So I think we could certainly do that. And maybe what I'll do is I can spin up that document, and after this call, I'll make sure to email that out to include that along with the deck from today's webinar so that you all have that. I think one thing is that the idea around announcing at NomCon is that we have we build momentum, and that we have one place where we're announcing a large set of commitments. And what that does too is that it also allows organizations that may not have been thinking about supporting maker-centered learning, or maybe have been doing some support of it but could be doing more to take notice. I think there's an advantage to to still announcing in a big way, in a big celebratory way at NomCon. But I love the idea of having a opportunity to openly workshop. So we'll get that document started. Thanks for that comment.
Yeah, it looks like there's a couple of people that are interested in that. And in fact, we've got another question from Joel Gordon in Arkansas, asking if it would be possible to share out a list of regional interests and maybe give us a chance to hold a coffee talk with regional partners. And I'll say that another comment from Micah at Arizona State University also mentioned that they would be interested in talking with others regarding higher ed. So it sounds like there's interest in, dividing into interest groups, kind of.
Yeah, that's great. Hi, Micah. Yes, I love both of those ideas. Certainly, we can also, what we can also do too is maybe on that document, it's also a place that folks can sort of tag their areas of interest within maker-centered learning, so that if you are more focused on the higher ed space, if you want to add certain tags to your line, or potentially what you put in as a potential commitment, you can put that there, and a place for contact information, for you to put your contact information. But that's great. And Micah, I'll follow up with you directly too on the higher ed stuff so we can connect individually. And then the regional interest, that's a great idea. And then Megan, was it around hosting like a webinar around, like for specific regional stakeholders?
It sounds more like it sounds a little bit more informal than maybe a webinar. Okay.
I think that one thing that I could offer on the Make for All side is that for anyone that is really interested in running or even convening or getting together, however you want to call it, mobilizing your local or regional community around Make for All, I would love if you wanted to reach out to me. I think what we could do is, because so much of this work happens at the local level, I think for those of you that are on that are really networked within your local community around maker-centered learning, to the extent that you would want to host something for your local stakeholders around this, I'd be more than happy to help connect with you on what resources we could provide, and how we can support that effort. So definitely, that sounds like a great idea.
Great.
And I think we're actually at time. If there aren't any other questions, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining today's session. I'm really excited, especially just hearing the questions and ideas that you all had in the latter half of the webinar. I feel like I've already got some really great people to follow up with. I will just leave you with this last slide that has some additional resources as you're thinking about commitment ideas. these are a couple of places you could go for more info. And of course, you can always feel free to email me directly as well. Thank you again. I hope to see or hear you all on the next session, which will be around workshopping commitments. Looking forward to talking with you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Beth.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.